Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:03 p.m. We will call today's Workforce and Talent Development Board Continuous Improvement Committee meeting to order. We'll go ahead and go around the room with introductions. I'll start. My name's Kaylin Lane. I work with the Ford Family Foundation as a field coordinator. I live out in rural Eastern Oregon in a little town called Condon. Proudly serve as the chair for the East Cascade Works Board of Directors and also the co-chair for this committee. I'll hand it over to Heather Ficht.
Thanks, Kaylin. So I see a lot of familiar faces, but for those that don't know me, I'm Heather Ficht, and I'm the local workforce board director for the area that serves the 10 counties immediately east of the Cascades. And I think we're going to talk about the change after this. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Heather. Anne?
Hi, everyone. My name's Anne Mercereau, and I am the immediate past chair of the Workforce and Talent Development Board and recently retired.
So exciting to hear your new tagline. And how about you, Andrew?
Hi, everyone. Andrew McGough. I'm the Executive Director of Work Systems, which is the Workforce Development Board that oversees Washington and Multnomah counties, and the Doom Loop, which is Portland. And I will hand it over to Paul.
I'm supposed to be the pessimistic one, Andrew. That's our arrangement.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
I'm Paul Brown. I'm usually left and more dark than Andrew, and I run a local company called Cinder. I also sit on the Work Systems Board here in Washington, Multnomah County, and a few other boards and activities in town. I'll pass it to, raise your hand if you haven't gone yet, please. Todd, how about Todd? Yeah, there you
go. Thanks, Paul. Andrew, I hope you're feeling okay. You sound a little clogged up there. So if you are, speedy recovery from whatever is ailing you. My name's Todd Nell. I'm the director of the Workforce and Talent Development Board at the HEC in the Office of Workforce Investments. And let's see, how about Aaliyah?
Hey, my name's Aaliyah Sobolowski. I am the board administrator for the Workforce and Talent Development Board in the Office of Workforce Investments. And I'll pass it on to whoever hasn't gone yet.
Let's see, Robin?
Sure, I'm happy to go. I apologize, my camera's not happy today, so bear with me. But my name is Robin Sansing, and I'm over at Southern Oregon University, and I'm the new Behavioral Health Initiative Director.
Welcome, Robin.
Thank you. Yeah, and same. I'm not sure who hasn't gone, so feel free to jump in, someone.
Brent.
Hi, I'm Brent Kell. I serve as CEO of Valley Immediate Care. I'm also in Southern Oregon. I'm also chair of our local Workforce Investment Board, which is Rogue Workforce Partnership, which serves Jackson and Josephine County down in the southern part of the state.
Great to see you, Brent. Katrina and then Bryn.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm not a member, I'm just here to listen. My name is Katrina Machoro. I'm a grant manager on the Future Ready Oregon team, which is within the Higher Education Coordinating Commission.
Excited to have you here, Katrina. Bryn?
Hello, hi, I'm a listener. I'm Bryn. I'm here in Eastern Oregon in Hermiston, and I am a community integration liaison for the Horizon Project that supports adults with intellectual developmental disabilities and our employment path program.
Great. And let's see, Julia.
Hi, everyone. Julia Steinberger, Director of the Office of Workforce Investments at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission.
Great. Is there anyone that didn't get a chance to introduce themselves? Well, thank you, everyone, so much for your time today. Is there any questions about today's agenda? Excellent. We'll hand it over to Heather and Andrew to give us an update on the change in the local board and the co-staffing of the Continuous Improvement Committee.
All right, well, I'll kick us off if you don't mind, Heather. Afternoon, everyone. So part of what we've been talking about at OWP, I have served on this committee since its inception, so 2 biennia ago. I don't know how many years that's been, but moving on maybe 5 years now, maybe 6, however long it's been. I have been the staff person representing the 9 workforce development boards across the state, and that's statutorily required under Senate Bill 623. Local boards are charged with jointly staffing this with the Workforce Talent Development Board. So that's Todd and I have been the tag team there for many years, as well as then the representation on the kick is supposed to be sort of representative of both local interests and state board interests. And I think, I think that's a good balance, and I think it's really served us well. It's great to have all of these sort of local board members and directors engaged in this conversation, because I really do think part of the goal here is to create that synergy between state objectives and local activities. So I think, having that local and state representation is really important, and it's great that we've sort of struck that balance over the years. I think that said, I think we do need over time to sort of think about, well, how do we refresh membership, staffing of the committee? And one thing that OWP has done is really sort of created a succession plan for a multitude of various sort of board slots, if you will, or committee responsibilities. So as an example, the Oregon Workforce Partnership is a partnership representing the 9 local boards. And whoever chairs the Oregon Workforce Partnership, the immediate past chair then becomes the representative on the state Workforce and Talent Development Board. So the idea is to have leadership transition then to leadership on the Workforce Talent and Development Board. And as we were just discussing, a variety of committee assignments and other things, the CIC is a logical place as well, where we want to make sure that local areas from across the state have an opportunity to engage in this conversation. And so what we thought is we could, Heather is the second immediate past chair. So we thought what a logical succession would be: chair of OWP, move on to the state board, then move on to the CIC. These are our 3 big sort of committee assignments or responsibilities that local boards take on, and really creating that kind of connection between those 3 experiences, we think helps on multiple fronts, both at the OWP level and then also just given the experience at the state board, and then you carry that forward to the CIC. I think it does logically make a lot of sense. And so what we asked Kaylin and Todd and Chris was if it would be okay if Heather took over the responsibilities of co-staffing this group, and then I would just sort of be available to her, continue to attend the meetings, but just be sort of a resource as Heather gets up to speed on the issues and other things. And, I sort of have a soft spot for this committee because I think it has tremendous potential. So I will probably audit you all over beyond where I'm actually needed. But that's sort of the idea. And Heather, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. So I think we're just trying to, as Andrew said, rotate. So the other committee that we're on isn't really a committee, it's the Workforce System Executive Team. So that's another one that we have a member on. It's all about, greater transparency and partnership.
I just want to underscore too, if I could, I think one of the other great things about the rotation amongst the 9 different executive directors from local boards across the state that comprise OWP into the WTDB seat, the KIC seat. I think it really helps to ensure that we get the lens of a local board from not just metro or mid-metro, but I think you get a good mix over time of bringing in rural and frontier Oregon. Shout out to you, Kaylin, over there in your neck of the woods. I think that's really important so that we have that good, mix and diversity of thought from all of the communities around Oregon and its 36 counties. So
Great. Well, welcome, Heather, and thanks, Andrew and Todd. We'll jump in now to public comment. Aaliyah, is there anyone wishing to give public comment today?
I have not received any public comment, no.
Wonderful. And have we established quorum yet?
Unfortunately, we have not.
Okay, no problem. We will table approving the meeting minutes from January later today, or just until our next meeting, if that's okay, Todd and Andrew?
yeah, that's cool, Kaylin. Just to let you know, I reached out to a couple of folks to see if they planned on attending just a few minutes ago via text. So maybe that will prompt a couple of to join us. And by the way, you'll notice, everybody in attendance, that Chris Latimer is listed with Kaylin. Chris is the other co-chair, in addition to Kaylin, of this committee. Chris wanted to be here, but is traveling back from the Midwest and had a flight delay, and I think is up in the sky right now, and so won't be able to attend. Thanks, Kaylin.
Great. Handing it over to you, Andrew and Heather, to give us an update on the impact of local areas and regions across Oregon with federal agencies funding and staffing cuts.
Andrew, you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'll kick it off. Just give a little context and sort of just food for thought. There's been a lot going on over the course of the last month or so with the new administration taking the reins. And I think from our perspective locally, and Paul's been kind of engaged in a lot of these conversations as part of our executive committee, our executive team. I think it's becoming increasingly important that we are as effectively aligned and organized as possible as we move forward with this system. And I think that the CIC really does present a really good opportunity to, again, really challenge us as a state to make sure that all of the resources that are engaged to provide support to this system are as effectively organized and focused as they need to be. And the reason I say that is I'll just paint a little bit of a picture of what we look like, and then I think Heather can share what we gathered some information from folks around the state, our colleagues around the state. So we're a pretty big organization as workforce boards go. We have about a budget of around $30 million. We have more than 60 funding streams right now, but about 41% of our funding is still originates at the federal level. So it's a significant, percentage of our budget, and how we, are able to leverage these other funding streams to really create a better package of service for businesses and job seekers in our community. And something that we've been, sort of focused on is that if you think about how a lot of these systems, particularly at the regional level, are put together, our metaphor that's emerged is around a Jenga tower. So if you think of a Jenga tower, what you do is you pull out blocks from the tower and then eventually the tower falls over, right? Well, I think that is how a lot of these systems, particularly at the regional level, that's been our job, is how do you braid these things together? How do you align them? How do you make them work together to, again, offer a better package of service to people in the community and to businesses that are looking for support? So, if you'll recall, there were two executive orders that were issued by the new administration that have a direct impact on the primary resource that supports our public workforce system across the state. That's the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And those focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs around that, and then some acknowledgement of, two sexes. But really what it meant was we got a directive from the Department of Labor that said we needed to immediately cease all activities associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as many of you know, that's easier said than done, because I think a lot of first of all, it's a deep value for our organization to make sure that all communities in our region have access to, adequate services and support, with a particular emphasis on communities that have either been historically marginalized or have been most negatively impacted by recent economic shifts or downturns like the pandemic, right? When you look at the populations there, they tend to be people of color, they tend to be low income, they tend to be those communities who have been lumped together as part of this diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. And so it not only is there a lot of sort of physical work that needs to go in to sort of scrub your websites and do the other things that ensure compliance, there's the emotional cost of working with organizations and communities that are frankly traumatized by some of this messaging and have, are looking at us as allies and looking at us for help. So we went through the process of complying with that. They're called a 10, which is a TEN, which is a directive that basically says immediately you have to cease and desist that stuff. Well, so that was one set of activities, and we're still, we have a lot of work that we've been focused on, like related to community benefits agreements, related to clean energy, related to pre-apprenticeship programs that focus on specific populations. And so the real question is, how deep do these expectations go around, removing ourselves from this notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And Bryn, that extends deeply into communities that are experiencing a variety of disabilities, whatever those might be. So there's a lot of challenge to that, both, I think, practical sort of management challenge, but then also the value challenge that I think we all kind of are wrestling with at the moment, and the emotional consequence of that. Well, then at the same time, we got a notice from the Department of Energy. So we have a direct grant with the Department of Energy, and the unfortunate thing about this grant wasn't unfortunate at the time. We think it was actually why we got the grant, but the title of the grant is Advancing Equity in the Solar Industry. And that grant is a partnership with folks like PGE, the statewide consortium, IBEW, and it was really intended to, again, bring, underserved communities into apprenticable occupations that in the clean energy sector through IBEW and other great partners. But that grant's just frozen. So that's $2 million that we no longer have access to. And so as a workforce board, we have staff people who were connected to that resource, and then we have contractors who we're expecting payment and doing work related to that resource. So I guess long story short, this is not unique to work systems. This is happening statewide. And I think we need to kind of, as sort of folks that oversee this state system, I think we need to sort of ramp up the energy and attention related to what could potentially happen. So, again, 41% federally funded, slightly less now that we don't have the DOE grant at the moment. But across the state, we have been talking for years that our state is really, really disproportionately reliant on federal dollars to run its workforce development programs. And the other thing that is sort of concerning at the moment, the public system is also the initial contact for people who are laid off from work. And we are seeing a significant shift in people getting laid off, from government workers to, advanced manufacturers. We're seeing increasing layoffs. And I think if you were to ask any labor market economist around, I think the future portends maybe even more layoffs. And so we're expecting a 10% reduction right now in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act resources. So that's a significant cut to begin with. If you couple that cuts with cuts to SNAP, which is also a very significant resource that's used to support services in the public workforce system, and then you add in cuts to things like Medicaid, you wouldn't think right off the bat that Medicaid would have a workforce implication. But the reality is, if someone loses access to health care, priorities shift, their capacity to, support themselves, and their need to have, insurance connected with work. So that changes how we respond if people can't access healthcare in ways that they used to be able to do that. And my final thing, and then I will turn it over to Heather to share, some of the rural perspective and the broader perspective across the state, is, March 14th is sort of the looming deadline here. March 14th is when the continuing resolution expires, which means the government isn't authorized to make payments until they come up with an agreement. Now, the good thing is that Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act money is actually forward funded. So there's money to run programs through June of 2026. But the
As long as we can access it.
Right. The challenge is, can you access that money? And so that's the other sort of looming point of import, I think, for this committee and for the state, to be honest with you, is what do we do if there's a government shutdown, and what's our plan to respond to that as a state and as a workforce development system? So those are just kind of the things that I wanted to bring to people's attention that are happening right now and are causing a lot of challenges within the system, and also portend some additional challenges moving forward. So maybe as a committee, we might want to sort of rethink about how are we engaging with the governor's office to better understand what are we going to do about some of this stuff, and where does the state sit, and that kind of thing. So
I'm not going to repeat anything Andrew said. Hopefully, I just want to add and amplify some things. One is that in rural Oregon, like 2/3 of the state is public lands. So the fact that federal employees, particularly our parks employees, are being laid off, that is disproportionately going to impact our rural areas. So that's a big deal, because in some of the rural and frontier counties that are in my region, that's the biggest workforce. So think about entire economies collapsing when there is not employment. So losing 100 jobs in Portland is different than losing 100 jobs in Hermiston. You know, our friend Bryn from Hermiston, that's a big deal. So I wanted to say that. Second, I wanted to add that I was just meeting yesterday. We have a really burgeoning bioscience industry in Bend. And one of the things that just got brought up last night is with all these federal layoffs, if there are more FDA layoffs, that means no clinical trials can move forward and the entire bioscience industry will shut down. That's just one example. That's private sector. That's a lot of money. Those are very high wage jobs. So what happens when we have no forest workers and no multiple layers of the economy can start to really collapse, and then who can serve folks? Like we are all nonprofits. All 9 local boards are nonprofits. So we are not government employees per se, but there's a lot of government employees in this state. And how much of the different state agencies are funded through federal funds? Like how much of OED staff is all federally funded? What happens if that goes away? And that's the bulk of our employees that deliver services in our workforce centers. And then the only other thing I wanted to add is work systems is kind of the outlier when it comes to all 9 boards as far as budget and size. But it is not unique in that all of us have at least 20 funding streams. We have 40. We're the second largest financially board in the state. But we have 40 funding streams, but most of the boards are more reliant on the federal funds than work systems. They have worked very, very hard to diversify their resources, and so have the rest of us. But we don't have the same kind of tax base in our more rural areas. So we don't have a lot of the county and city investments that happen in other areas. So I would say that generally speaking, 60 to 75% of the other 8 boards are reliant on federal funds to fund services. So it's just a big deal. And it's like at the end of the day, this state, because of the way our tax structure works, if people aren't working, we don't have money in our state general fund. We just don't. So if we start seeing more massive layoffs and we don't generate personal income tax, that's 98% of the general fund. I don't know how we're going to pay for stuff and things. So not doomsday scenario, just like, can we be cognizant and problem solving together and getting clarity on, plans and ways forward.
Well, Andrew, Todd, shall we open up the floor for discussion, thoughts? Anyone have anything they'd like to add? I'm certainly uncomfortable adjourning the meeting since we don't have anything else to talk about right now. I think that this is a time to come together, support each other as a community.
On the positive side, I can just jump in, Kaylin, and say I did see something come across my desk from the state economists, and they are forecasting a little bit more rosy of a picture in terms of overall economic outlook in terms of production, and that of course includes tax receipts, which will head to Salem. So I was kind of surprised by that, I must say, but a little bit of good news. So it's not all doomsday, I would say. But I think the other thing that I also wanted to mention, just to underscore what Heather and Andrew touched on, is, when we got together with Chris, Andrew, and I, and Kaylin, and planned for this meeting, we just thought it would be really great to hear from others in terms of what's happening in your space, given the current changes in the administration at the national level, and sort of, share that information, and then see if there's anything in terms of next step work that this committee could do and or the state workforce board could do. Don't even know what that is in terms of advocacy support, but just thought that it's a sort of unprecedented situation that we're in, and we wanted to give you all the opportunity to share your good thinking, comments, feedback, recommendations while we were together today. Thanks.
I have a few thoughts.
From the healthcare perspective, we're really watching the Medicaid cuts as well. We have about 130,000 folks in our workforce board area that rely on Medicaid. A lot of them are kids, a lot of them are people with disabilities. So we're really watching those real carefully and trying to figure out some backup plans. We think with the current cuts that are on the table, as many as half of those people could lose their coverage. So about 65,000 people in both counties. So very concerned about that, as well as the workforce development as well.
Paul,
Yeah.
Paul, go ahead.
A couple of quick thoughts. One in particular, as it relates to labor that is, from my perspective, potentially most vulnerable, which is agricultural workers, day laborers, migrant laborers, transient workforce. I think that there's a wide variety of things that I'm concerned about. One is the sort of obvious potential targeting by ICE or any group identifying itself as ICE adjacent, because there's really no way for most of those folks to verify that the person harassing them is actually specifically from the federal government. And part of my worry is also in seeing the fear that is going to get created as a result of all this, to see the potential impact on those labor forces. I still am haunted by the pictures I saw in September of 2020 when the fires were going and the agricultural workers were still in the fields having to pick all the harvest of the fruits and vegetables in our amazingly bountiful state, while all of us were huddled up with air filters. Speaking at least from Portland's perspective, all of us were huddled up with air filters and hiding indoors and not interacting with people closely. So speaking for myself anyway, I've started to reach out to local organizations that specifically focus on these populations and trying to find ways that I can both help lift up the voice and potentially my network might be a resource for them. The reality is they're statewide. That's not just a Portland regional thing. There's a significant agricultural population up and down the Willamette Valley and throughout central and eastern state as well. So I haven't heard of a lot of explicit events happening yet, which is an interesting thing. I feel like the headlines are really setting us up to be scared of these things before they actually happen, which I have lots of opinions on. But yeah, I'd love for this group to really help keep each other informed about how those things might be playing out, especially outside of the, maybe obvious parts that might be visible in Portland. I think I really appreciate that this is a statewide group that I'm a part of, and all of you are doing really important work in your regions as well. So if you're hearing or seeing more stuff or have ideas about what we might be able to offer, I'd love to use some of this space for that as well.
I just wanted to throw out there, Paul, that I am the chair of the nonprofit organization Oregon Human Development Corporation, and they are the statewide migrant seasonal farm worker serving organization. They have a big presence in Eastern Oregon, Hermiston, the Gorge, and they are seeing fewer people are willing to come in for services because they're very afraid of being targeted. There's a lot of subgroups that are communicating via text and messaging platforms that are not public. So there's a lot of informal organizing that's happening that's kind of under the radar. And I know that there have been a couple ICE incidents in the Gorge. So the largest employer paid housing for migrant seasonal farm workers is actually in Hood River County. And they've been doing things like they did things during the pandemic where they would actually buy foodstuffs and keep them on site so that people didn't have to go into town. And so I have a feeling that we're going to see that again. But in the next couple months is when, and Kaylin knows this, particularly in the gorge, it goes cherries, apples, pears, and they stay and they do food processing too. So we may have a lot of harvest that doesn't get picked. I mean, it's very possible that happens.
Does anyone remember the story early in the pandemic of literally, I think it was thousands of tons of pork that was just left to rot because they just didn't have the food processing for it? Not in Oregon, it was a more Midwest thing, but yeah, those stories are going to be haunting this year. And it'll be worse next year when we don't do the planting in time to actually do the harvest for next year and so on.
And they can't get the loans they can't trust that they're going to get the loans to get the seeds, it's just, the whole thing is, I want to talk about puppy dogs and rainbows.
See, this is like the national doom loop, not just Portland. But I mean, I think from my perspective, I do think, it's evolving every day. Something's new, right? And so I do think March 14th is going to be a telling date. It'll be interesting to see even what's in the new administration's budget around workforce development, because that's also part of the conversation here is what are the priorities for the new administration, and does that include workforce development? And, I think we have some hope that, there's an acknowledgement that people need to connect to work, especially if we're going to reduce immigration and we're going to, have all of these other expectations. So I think what we are well positioned to do is help the administration understand that we have a system, that's, it's imperfect, but it's a system nonetheless that's very capable of helping people connect to training, helping people transition from unemployment. We have infrastructure, we have partnerships. And so, I think that's part of the work too. I think Lori Chavez DeReamer is likely to get approved. I would love to see this. We're working on her locally. As I mentioned, Paul and our executive board are working on our connections with Lori, but I think, helping her understand that there's a good infrastructure out there that she can use to, implement some of the administration's priorities as it relates to workforce is something that we ought to be, pushing forward, I think. And then the flip side is, it would be helpful to see if there's a strategy at the governor's office level about what do we do with these big cuts, or if there's a shutdown to know, okay, what should we do around that? Because again, we have a lot of very small organizations that are contracted through us, and they can't withstand, multiple months of non-payment. They will just go out of business. And that's in an environment where we've all experienced a dearth of service provision to begin with. And it's like, if you lose these service providers, even if we get resources, our capacity to respond is really seriously diminished. So we've got to, I think, be more proactive about how do we hang on to those networks and make sure that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you will, while we wait for the federal stuff to sort itself out.
Todd, it looks like you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions, and maybe this informed your comments, Andrew. I know that you are on the Federal Reserve Bank down in San Francisco's board. So I was just kind of curious if you've heard, thinking from that network of yours. And then I was wondering if you and Heather had heard anything through NOB in terms of what other folks around the states are thinking, National Association of Workforce Board. everyone. And then a statement. I wonder, Julie and I participate quite actively with a particular division of the National Governors Association on best practices in education, workforce, and economic prosperity. I'm wondering if we might invite one of the folks that's a member of that team and actively involved in what's happening on the Hill. And maybe he can join us for one of these KIC meetings and sort of give us the latest and greatest in terms of a download. Okay, I see a thumbs up from Heather. Just, I love your idea about what can we do proactively. I'm totally willing to reach out to Jack Porter, who's the director of that particular track of National Governors Association, to see if we could get one or two folks to join this meeting in March. And if we can't align it with the meeting, then maybe we can try to arrange an additional time for a conversation with him. And as I talk and think, maybe I don't know, Andrew and Heather, you could work your network and maybe pull in another couple of leaders from around the country, and maybe we could do sort of a panel discussion with them to just better understand what's happening elsewhere and potential, pro-action that we can, take as a state. Oh, and I noticed, Caitlin, Nicole Moody joined. I don't know if, Nicole, you want to introduce yourself? I saw you go on and off mic there, so I thought you might want to say something.
Oh no, I was just trying to get everything set up appropriately. But yes, I'm Nicole Moody. I'm a VP of HR over here at Aviva Health, and I was actually just doing some searching to see how I could actively get more engaged from a broader perspective. And I came upon this team, and I thought I would join the public meeting and see what conversations are taking place and see how I can help contribute.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Todd, I can talk a little bit for just a second about one of the things that we're doing as a local board, and it's not going to solve the problem, but just as a reminder to everybody, or in case you don't know, all of our funds are cost reimbursement. So that means the funds have to be spent before we can ask for reimbursement. So it's kind of risky, right? So we're betting on the come. And so it is outside of GAAP accounting practices to draw down more than 60 days worth of funds, but we are on the regular now, regularly drawing down from the feds 3 months of operating for ourselves in the field, because we need that cushion. And then after 60 days, we'll put more unspent on the draw and then draw down another, because we still have to pay our bills. Andrew brought this up earlier, like, we're doing work and we need to get paid for the work that we've done. This isn't work, and so we have a roughly $9 million budget. Well, 85% of it isn't in-house. It's paying other people to do the work. So it's just really important that we're kind of sharing those kinds of strategies. And we do that at the local board level, but it'd be great to know, like, for example, and maybe Julia knows this, like, has the state drawn down the ARPA funds? Are we at risk of not getting our ARPA funds from the prosperity programs? Like, is that in the bank somewhere in Oregon, or might we not get reimbursed for those? Like, those are just questions that I have too about the money. Because actually it was Andrew and I's draw that got held up for, like, I don't know, what was it, 2 weeks, Andrew? Like, everybody else got paid in the state except for him and me. And I was like, oh no, we got to make payroll. So.
Oh my gosh, that's rough stuff. It reminds me of, man, Heather, remember we used to talk when East Cascade was first established, there was all sorts of stuff, and man,
it was a hot mess, right?
It was a hot mess for you. And man, personally, I felt really bad. I did hear a little bit about that, not a lot. And I just checked to see if Julia was still here because I know she was in the thick of that. And unfortunately, she rolled off.
Well, I can just tell you that the Federal Reserve is like as nonpartisan as you can get, especially at the moment. They're like just keeping their head down. They're all about the only tool they really have is interest rates. And my role with them is really just to inform them what's going on in terms of the people we're trying to serve and what are we hearing from them. But I do work pretty closely with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and they do have some national, lobbyists that are working on this stuff. Um, it's just a mystery right now where the current administration stands in terms of workforce development. I think that's the biggest challenge. Like there was a bipartisan bill that passed to replace the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And it was connected to the continuing resolution that was set to be voted on right after the election, but then that was stopped. And the current continuing resolution, which was passed in December, for some reason they pulled out, well, we kind of know what the reasons are, but any new pieces of legislation that would have sort of been perceived to tie the new administration's hands were kind of pulled out of that. So that new bill was separated from the continuing resolution. Now, this is the biggest sort of mystery, right? Is that the Department of Governmental Efficiency has said, and just so you know, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act is technically unauthorized, meaning it expired in 2019. But just because a bill is expired doesn't mean that you can't move appropriations to it. And the reality is about 25% of all domestic programs are expired and they continue to receive money. Now, so what thinking about, the practicality of that or whether that's the right strategy or not, that's the reality, right? Like the Veterans Administration has not been authorized since like 1998. And that's, it's $110 billion a year that goes to the Veterans Administration. So it's just crazy stuff like that probably someone needs to fix. But the Doge's comment was, well, if Congress can't authorize it, then why should we fund it? And so, I mean, that could be the kind of initial response that we see. And it worries me a little bit. But again, I think, look, if we do begin to see unemployment tick up, which I think we're already starting to see, that becomes a political issue that people can't ignore. And we are the de facto system that is the front line with dealing with people who are laid off and unemployed. So making sure that that system is resourced and supportive of those workers would probably be a smart political move as well as a good thing to have happen. So I don't want to be sort of negative Nelly all this stuff. I do love the idea, Todd, of maybe looking for some folks that could come and give us some perspective about maybe what some other states are doing. And maybe that's a place where we invite some agency heads and maybe someone from the governor's office so that we're all sort of sitting there and hearing and chatting with folks together. Because I do think this is unprecedented, not just for Oregon, but for everybody. So it's like, okay, how do we steel ourselves from the chaos momentarily and then position ourselves for success sort of when things calm down a bit? And I'm happy to reach out to U.S. Conference of Mayors and NOB if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I really like
Yeah,
that
that's
idea too, Todd.
Yeah, I think that that would be helpful. A little bit of crystal ball in it, but I think those discussions would be really valuable in the event that things do go sideways or down. Just a couple of factoids that I should have probably mentioned earlier. Andrew, when you said your budget was about 30 million, just to sort of get you all some perspective, our Office of Workforce Investments here at the HEC about a decade ago received close to $60 million a year to then turn around and the lion's share of that funding, as is the case today, went out to the 9 local workforce boards by a complicated formula based on a number of data points that we don't need to go into because it gets really confusing. But what's happened in a decade already, prior to the current situation we find ourselves in, is that our funding at the state level has been reduced to right around, maybe a bit under now, $30 million a year. So we have half as much funding, and that doesn't take into consideration, obviously, inflation, cost of living increases in so many spots, housing, childcare, all those that you well know about. So, I mean, we as an office, this is federal funding from Department of Labor at 30 million, have basically the same budget Andrew does in toto. We get a little bit more in general fund here in our office, depending on the year and the governor's budget. But I thought that might be just interesting for you all to know about. And then the other thing I was going to share was I loved your idea about agency heads, Andrew. I think that bringing in people like, I'm sure David Gerstenfeld would be happy to participate, assuming we could, make it work with his schedule. But if we could get maybe him and David in particular, I think David Gerstenfeld over at the employment department, those two I think would be really helpful to have a conversation with in terms of what they're thinking, what they're hearing from the governor's office, from the legislature, because they both are, as you might imagine, pretty well connected with Oregon legislature, as well as the federal delegation, which makes me think, I know, you both, Heather and Andrew, know Bonamici. There are other federal legislators that we know. So I think as we think out loud and share in thought, there's plenty of folks we could bring in over the next, maybe even quarter to some of these meetings to have conversations with to better understand, what's happening now and what could potentially happen in the future.
I just wanted to add too that right now the Trade Act has not been funded, right? So no allocations have gone to that. They haven't appropriated more funds. So we're already looking at the loss of a lot of the business services staff that are currently delivering services through OED in the field. So they're already talking about downsizing in an unrelated loss of funding. So again, and at the end of the day, guys, it takes people to serve people. It just does. We have to pay for people. That's what our money needs to pay for. That's what makes us different than just using, an online platform to connect.
You probably would have mentioned this already, and I'm not as close to it as some of the other folks here at the agency are. But Heather and Andrew, are you aware of any legislation that has already dropped or will be dropping that would if passed, bring in any general fund increases into the mix? Or
why yes, Todd.
Oh,
in fact,
I thought you might say that.
Andrew put in the chat our we are supporting what is it, Andrew? House Bill 3669, which is a continuation of prosperity programs funding. So that was the Prosperity 10,000 that was a part of Future Ready, where we've had great performance. We're serving thousands and thousands of people across the state. The other one is we're asking for $3 million for WorkSource reentry. So that's the program where we have work source centers in the prison, and that money wouldn't come to local boards. That money goes straight to Oregon Employment Department to pay for 10 staff over a 2-year period. And I'll actually be testifying on that on Monday at 3 o'clock. If anybody wants to tune in for an exciting legislative session where you will hear all kinds of cool information. And we have been able to recruit a gentleman named Josh who went through the program, who's going to talk about how life-changing it was for him. So.
And like I've not quite seen that plug tone, heard that tone, or seen that face. I thought it was effective.
But
all right. Well, we are nearing time today, everyone. So let's begin to wrap up if that's okay. Remember now more than ever, it's a time to build community, focus on relationships, connections, the people around us, our neighbors. I'd like to end with a quick poem. When the road is long and the tasks pile high, keep your dreams burning and reach for the sky. Through every setback, through struggle and strain, hope is the fuel that lessens the pain. Each effort matters, each step you take, brick by brick, the future you make. Hold on to purpose and let passion ignite, for dawn always follows the darkest night. Don't hesitate to be someone's, shoulder to cry on, an open ear to listen to. I think now is the time to show the people around us that we truly care. So it's 4 p.m. Let's go ahead and officially adjourn today's meeting. Thank you guys for your time. Look forward to seeing you in March.